Sorry, Dave, to put that on. So if you do the honours, Dave, please.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kine ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai. E hi ahi ana te atikura, hei tio, hei huka, hei hauhu, tihei maurioa.
Thanks, Dave. Apologies, we've got Neil Brown and Jean Despar. Have there any other ones? Oh, we've got lateness from Chris Allen.
Ian McKenzie's an apology.
Ian McKenzie. Is that all the apologies? Thank you. Is there any extraordinary business to come up that's not, we don't know about? Not at this stage. Register of interest in your board minutes, board pack. So as I said before, it's up to you, the individual's responsibility to update them. Confirmation of the minutes. The minutes are circulated from the last meeting on the 24th of January. Do I have someone to move that they're accurate? Who's at the meeting? Thank you, Artie. All those, most of you need a seconder. Clear, thank you. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Any matters arising that won't come up that anyone wants to bring up? That's great, thank you. What's next, Dave?
No correspondence.
No correspondence. Anyone got any correspondence? Hi, Sydney, I didn't see you there. Good to have you on the floor instead of on the... So public contribution, anyone in the public there, just feel free to join in and ask questions if you feel like it. So the first bit of business, I think, is the boundary drain trial results, 5-year review, is that correct?
Yep.
So I think we've got Adrian and Kimberly and Maria come and speak. I just have one question before we get going, Adrian. There was another report that was circulated by, what are they, Waterway Consulting from Dunedin. So is yours a summary of that, of your take on that report?
A large amount of the presentation is about that report that we got as an independent assessment of the whole trial. So that's a major part of it, yes.
Because I see in that, in that report there was a recommendation with a consent, which we haven't, a recommendation on the consent conditions, which is not mentioned in your report.
Yep, so that was one of the components of independently consulting with Waterways Consultants. Today we're just going to provide you on what the summary of the data for the previous consent was, and then Maria will talk a little bit on what the next steps are.
So you'll cover if you're going to follow that recommendation?
Yes, it will include, we're going to talk about the current consent that's in process to continue the trial.
Right.
And adopting some of the recommendations and issues that were brought up by Richard's report.
Okay, thank you. So I think we can take it as read. It's quite a big document. So Adrian, you just highlight the bits that you think are interesting. Well, it's interesting, but you know, what have changed and moves and any opinions that you guys have got?
Well, I think that the presentation we're going to give today, all three of us are going to give different parts of it.
Right.
Particularly Kimberly's going to cover the bulk of Richard Allabone's Waterways Consulting report, and then we conclude with where to from here.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay, well, thank you, Zone Committee, for the opportunity to present to you today. The outline on the board out there is we're firstly going to cover the background to the trial and the Hinds Drains context, so you can see the big picture. We've been working in these Hinds Drains area in this for over 10 years, so it's important to see that big picture context. We're then going to run through a summary of the monitoring data, and that's that in particular, as you've been questioning me, is the the Waterways Consulting Report, which we deliberately went out to an independent consultant to get that sort of independence of how well has that consent monitoring and the monitoring been carried out, and what does it really tell us? So we've got that level of independence. That allows us to assess the many of the considerations of the trial, in particular the environmental objectives, that's A to D, which are the environmental considerations of the trial as to whether this variable flow trial has been successful or not. There are some other considerations for the trial as well, which were the economics and the cultural considerations, as well as then considering, given that this trial was initiated back in 2017, 2018, how does that sit now in 2023 with the current legislation and a somewhat different emphasis? We have just overnight received a review of that Waterways report by on behalf of Arowhenua Runanga, and so we'll run briefly through that, and we'll conclude with where the next steps are going forward with this. And all the steps through this, I'll really acknowledge Craig and the other farmers that are involved in this trial for stepping forward and being very cooperative and working with us very well through this process. So the brief background: the Hinds Drains Working Party, established by the Zone Committee in 2014, it really identified 4 drain sequences or 4 drain types, of which the boundary drain is a southern one south of the Hinds River, and therefore is part of that Mayfield Hinds sequence of perennially flowing streams, and so that's the one we're working on today. The Hinds Drains Working Party back then developed management plans for the main water bodies of the Hekeo Hinds Drains system, and it's been a very, very productive and very cooperative process to date. What arose out of that was the Land and Water Regional Plan, Plan Change 2, that focused predominantly on setting nutrient limits, nutrient reduction targets, and was very nutrient focused. It did not specifically address flow and allocation, and that's why the Hinds Drains Working Party was largely reconvened again after the Plan Change 2 process had been completed, and it was reconvened to identify additional issues, including recommending flow and water allocation approaches. That's a very controversial subject in itself in this area, and some of the outcomes of that was that the measuring sites remain as they are until 2025 with no new abstractions. Late in that process, Craig and his colleagues came to us wanting to develop a smarter sort of flow allocation, and that's where boundary drain arose, and you could call it the exception to what had gone on elsewhere in the Hinds Drains area, being a variable flow trial being developed to change from what the old history had been in terms of flow regimes. Next slide. So what is the boundary drain variable flow trial? It's minimum flows, as I said earlier, minimum flows and allocation were recommended to remain unchanged throughout the Hinds Drains until 2025. So there was really recommended no change, but to maintain with the status quo. However, that really wasn't working with the farmers to the south that were still very reliant on the water from drains such as boundary drain. So they proposed a pilot trial for an adaptive flow trial. And once again, I'll keep reiterating, this is for the Mayfield Hinds perennially flowing drains. The boundary drain minimum flow was 150 litres per second all year at a Trigpole Road monitoring site. It was the classic, very simple single minimum flow all year round type sort of approach. The change was a proposed adaptive minimum flow trial to increase the water take reliability over the summer for the farmers, and that's the critical periods of irrigation, and higher flow requirements in the shoulder periods and in the winter to acknowledge the migration, the life stages of the aquatic species outside of these months, so we could get a bit of a mix of trying to have a healthier water body with acknowledging when flows are really needed. Next slide. And this figure on the board basically illustrates the differences. The blue up on the Up on the side of the graph, it's showing what the minimum flows were, and along the bottom was pretty much the monthly minimum flows, except in September you can see September was divided into two different 2-week periods. And certainly, initially, the blue bars show that the minimum flow was 150 litres per second all year round. But the variable flow trial shows that in January, February, March, it was lower than 150, down at about 100 litres per second. And then for April, May, June, July, August, the minimum flow was much higher and allowing for more flow for different life stages or the breeding of fish. And then in the shoulder period of September, October, November, December, you can see it comes back down into either being the same as the previous 150 litres a second, or for November, December, dropping a little below again. So that figure essentially is the trial we're talking about, although there were other elements of it, including a fresh protection rule as well, such that if there was a high rainfall event, all irrigation would cease for 24 hours to allow some of those natural freshes to run through the system. What have we got next? So consent conditions in the freshwater management plan. It's worth illustrating that this was a consenting process. It's not just a high-level sort of planning process. The existing consents were covered by an existing resource consents with 150 litre per second minimum flow. So to actually give effect to this variable flow trial, it had to be a regulatory consenting process. And that's where this whole process was run through a consenting process. That can be a little bit stifling because it actually means a lot of these things have to be set out in black and white as in consent conditions. Once again, I'll reiterate there was a fresh protection clause here. We take shall cease for 24 hours if rainfall of greater than 25 millimetres in 24 hours is recorded. So there's quite a bit of monitoring required to that to trigger it and to make that work. The freshwater plan outcomes that were trying to be sought here were also set out A to F there, where we had increased flow, aiming for increased flow variability, including fresh protection, maintained or enhanced fish migration and recruitment into the catchment. So this is trying to make sure that the fish are getting in there, into the drain system. Maintained and enhanced fish spawning, so that when fish are getting in there, they are being able to spawn and reproduce and make a stable population. It's also D was maintained and enhanced fish habitat. In other words, so they've got a area to live in that's really good for them to live in, so they're thriving, not just surviving. The other two, which Maria will cover briefly, were outside this environmental area, and that was maintained and enhanced farm economic benefits. In other words, it is very worthwhile, it is very important to illustrate that this was beneficial to the farmers, as well as considering how beneficial it is to the environment. And the other was maintained and enhanced cultural values that Maria will talk about later as well. So overall, there was a monitoring plan set up to assess these above outcomes, and a 5-year consent was run. It's now concluded. It finished a year or two ago, and as a new consent under review, in other words, there's been an application to renew that consent to keep it live. And the summary report for assessing outcomes A to D, or the first 4 of those, is what we're going to talk about today. And Kimberly will talk about the Waterways report.
So we contracted Richard Allibone from Waterways Consulting to write this review. As Adrian mentioned, it's an independent review, which we felt was appropriate in this sense, given the involvement that we had along with the Hines Drains the Boundary Drain group of developing this flow trial. So the summary report uses monitoring data that was collected, such as flow, river mouth, drain mouth openings at the Hapua, fish communities, invertebrate communities, habitat modelling, and water quality data. And this was all collected as per the freshwater management plan attached to the consent. So the flow monitoring data showed that there were 2 distinct periods of different flow regimes during the trial period, there were higher flows in the earlier stages of the trial, and then the low flow period didn't begin until late 2020, extending through until the May 2021 floods, and this was really the only significant period where the minimum flows were triggered. So we took some continuous records using a video camera down at the hapua to sort of give us an indication of the openings and closure periods at the hapua. This is important because hapua closures during the migration periods have the potential to influence fish migration, recruitment, and also if it's during spawning time, it influences the spawning success. So the data we collected showed that the hapua was generally open during the spring migration periods of species such as eels, tuna, or whitebait inanga from the sea to freshwater. The summer closures during the 2020-21 summer, when the flows were much lower, have shown us that there may have been an impact on the migration of common and bluegilled billies into the drain during that period, and then later on in this late summer and autumn, also potential to be influencing on the outmigration of inanga and torrent fish. So these graphs are showing us the boundary drain physical habitat. It's been modelled data that was carried out by Mark Webb. It shows us an estimate of the habitat availability and how that changes with flow. So the top left graph shows us how that influences on the bully species, and it shows the blue line, the orange line there is the bluegilled billy. They tend to prefer a faster flowing riffle type habitat, therefore their habitat availability is much lower at the lower flows, and so therefore it's impacted by lower flows in the drain. However, the common and the upland bully show that there's more of a peak habitat at that minimum flow of 0. If you can see the 0.1 on the graph, that sort of indicates what our minimum flow is. So anything to the left of that shows that the habitat availability is declining. Also, we've got the larger fish species such as the brown trout and the tuna eels. The modelling for these species is showing us that there is a habitat decline when flows drop below 100 litres per second, which is the summer minimum flow, with a decline starting as high as 200 litres per second. On the brown trout graph, you will see that it's separated out to smaller size brown trout species and then also the adult brown trout, and it shows that there's quite a difference in habitat availability between the adult brown trout and the smaller size brown trout, with the adult brown trout having a much lower habitat availability with the lower flows. So as well as flow, there are some other factors that we need to take into consideration. There's also the water quality and macroinvertebrate communities that are also controlling variables of fish populations. Our monitoring data has shown us that temperature and dissolved oxygen were within the tolerance limits of the fish species that were present in boundary drain. However, we have seen that the nitrate concentrations were well above the nitrate toxicity limits that are set in the Land and Water Regional Plan during the Plan Change 2 phase. That is the red line on the graph. It's 6.9 milligrams per litre, and all of these monitoring results are well above that. So this is important because at these concentrations there is potential for there to be toxic impacts impacting on fish recruitment and survivability. This graph is showing us the quantitative macroinvertebrate community index, which is a measure of invertebrate health in a stream. It ranges from 0 to 10, 10 being indicative of more sensitive species and better water quality and habitat quality, and the lower numbers being that there's more impact on those communities. So you can see the data is sitting at around 4 here, which is indicating that there's a bit of stress on this environment. This graph is also showing us that between the 5 years of the trial, there has been little change despite the variable flows. I've got 2020 circled there as the period where the minimum flows were triggered. The data collected for this season was collected in December, when minimum flows were really only just starting to be triggered, and these minimum flows extended further into 2021. So it's really only showing us the macroinvertebrate community at the beginning of the low flow period. The invertebrate data collected also showed us that there are fish prey species present. However, they're limited to be more of a smaller size fish prey species, and there is less larger species available to fish. And this is important because it impacts on the larger fish species have less of a food source in those larger invertebrate species. So this brings us to what is the fish population and how's it looking throughout the flow trial period. Richard Allabone's report tells us that there has been variable recruitment over that period for eels, bullies, inanga and brown trout, and it's been low at times. Also, the fish length data that was collected indicates that both bullies and brown trout are more abundant as young of the year, so the smaller size fish, and that the adults of these species are rare. So this is indicating to us that there's low survivability of fish to adult stages. So what is influencing this fish survivability is that there is probably a lack of preferred species habitat for these present fish species. So boundary drain is dominated by run habitats. It's got a lack of riffles, which are the preferred habitat of blue-gilled billies, and it's also got a limited pool habitat, which is beneficial to species such as the bullies, inanga, eels, and lamprey species. There's also the factor of the poor water quality, such as specifically the nitrate concentrations that are well above the toxicity thresholds. So this is again probably impacting on recruitment and survivability. And it's also influencing macroinvertebrate species, which species are able to persist in the drain, and which of these species are going to be a good food source for the fish. So with all of this data that's been collected, it brings us to being able to make an assessment of those initial flow trial environmental objectives. So those are the first 4. So starting with the very first one, which is increased flow variability, including the fresh protection. Richard Allabone's report shows us that rainfall and flow was above minimum flows for much of the trial. The fresh protection data for Hapua opening sort of indicated that there's more knowledge required to determine what kind of flows are required for maintaining that habitat. And bearing in mind we did only get 1 period of prolonged minimum flows. And it's also showing us that, so this, to summarise that objective, we're seeing that while fish migration and recruitment appears to be maintained, we didn't really have any evidence that it's been enhanced. The second objective is to maintain or enhance fish migration and recruitment. The Hapua openings and closings, apologies, some of the slide has been cut off at the bottom, so Maria's just helping me out with that. So the Hapua was observed to be closed for a prolonged period when the flows dropped between 150 litres per second, which was the original minimum flow. The summer migration periods of common and blue-gilled billies into the drain, and inanga and torrent fish out migration in the late autumn is also impacted by this. So recruitment is therefore reliant on these species migrating during the restricted opening periods. So if you've got that prolonged closure, it really squeezes that recruitment period to when the drain is open. Recruitment also appears to be not only limited by the hapua openings, but also these other factors that we've talked about, such as the available habitat, the water quality, and the food prey source. So therefore, it's been considered that fish migration and recruitment has been maintained. The third is maintain or enhance fish spawning. The brown trout spawning data was variable between the years. It hasn't shown an influence on spawning for the monitoring event that was captured during lower flows. However, the fish survey data does suggest to us that adult spawning brown trout are quite rare in Boundary Drain. Therefore, the spawning may be restricted by the actual number of the resident spawning adults, as opposed to the actual amount of spawning habitat. So, once again, fish spawning appears to be maintained rather than enhanced. And the final of those 4 environmental objectives is maintain or enhance fish habitat. So fish habitat is limited by diversity, so Boundary Drain is dominated by the more run-type habitats. The modelling data shows that there's a difference in habitat at various flows, but it's often small, between that 100 to 200 litres per second. A variable minimum flow is not likely to alter habitat availability significantly, and flow alone is unlikely to be the only restricting factor of habitat suitability for the fish species present. So we're taking into consideration the water quality and the macroinvertebrate food sources that are also influencing the suitability of this habitat. So we conclude that the habitat has been maintained, but it is considered to be of generally poor quality given those water quality and macroinvertebrate factors as well.
Thank you, Kimberly. That's great. It's also worth that sets out what the consent objectives were, but there are a few other things to consider here as well. One we would be remiss not to mention was the Moros Drain diversion, and certainly the Waterways Consulting Report mentioned that as well. Certainly, well down this Boundary Drain catchment, there is a transfer of water with significant flows diverted from Boundary Drain into Moros Drain, and particularly at critical times. And this transfer of water is a reduction in flow in the lower Boundary Drain, and can lead to some of these results that are limiting the system. So habitat available modelling indicated a decline in available habitat for fish species, particularly in the lower Boundary Drain monitoring site, as a result of this diversion and a reduction in lower flows. And really what we're trying to say is this issue needs to be resolved better for successful trial outcomes. There was a lot of discussion with this through it, but I understand the farmer irrigator involved in this wasn't part of the trials, so didn't have as strong a vested interest in managing that to the same extent. But we'd be remiss not to mention that as an issue to be resolved, particularly going forward into another 5-year period.
Kia ora koutou, my name's Maria Capteen. If you don't know me, I'm a Land Management and Biodiversity Advisor here in the Ashburton Zone team at ECAN. And I'm just going to talk briefly about the remaining 2 objectives that were part of the consent for this trial that were not covered by Richard Allabone's report because they were addressed elsewhere. So the first objective was that the trial would either maintain or enhance on-farm economic benefits. So we commissioned McFarlane Rural Business to conduct an analysis of farm economic data that was provided by the farmers involved in the trial, and they were only able to do the analysis from the year ended 2021, which was when the low flows were triggered. So the outcome of that analysis was that farmers were able to increase their crop yield due to their ability to take more water in those drier months. So the flow trial enabled them to do that. And so on average, the farmers saw an increase in profitability by having these variable minimal flows on the Boundary Drain, and their increase in profitability was $1,545 per hectare per year. So that trial objective was shown to enhance the on-farm economic benefits by this trial. The second objective was analysis of maintained or enhanced cultural values. So unfortunately, cultural monitoring was not able to be undertaken at the beginning of the trial, and with no baseline to work on, Arawhina were unable to provide an assessment from the end of the trial as well. So we were unable to get an outcome on this particular objective. So it was not undertaken, it wasn't assessed, and we'll talk about it when it comes through, but Arawhina's comments on this report capture that and their absolute willingness to carry out cultural monitoring first as a baseline and then as an ongoing part of a consent continuation should that come through. So it wasn't through lack of willingness, just the capacity wasn't there at the time, so we weren't able to do it.
Okay, so some of the key messages from this trial is that, as Kimberly has indicated, fish migration, fish recruitment, spawning, and habitat outcomes of the boundary drain variable flow trial were just simply maintained, but then they were in a poor condition but not enhanced. That's probably the crux of the result coming out at the end. It was limited. There were only 2 years of the 5-year trial which were relevant to the new flow regime. In other words, the first 3 years, the minimum flow, the new flow regime wasn't being triggered because there was plenty of water in the system, and that was always very limited. And that's one of the difficulties of trying to determine these with a 5-year trial. Moving then on is that Richard Allibone from the Waterways Consulting report basically clearly illustrated to us as well that flow variability alone is unlikely to be the only controlling factor of maintaining these environmental factors of fish migration, recruitment, spawning, etc. And that this is probably more in keeping with where legislation now is of the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management, the National Environmental Standard for Freshwater, etc., of taking a more holistic or broader view of all of the features of the natural environment rather than just separating flow or water quality or habitat, etc. So the survivability of fish populations may be influenced by a lack of preferred habitat, and by the effects of poor water quality and by a limitation of the invertebrate food source. And I think going forward, that's probably the real challenge now, is trying to feed those things together. And it's probably one of the limitations of this trial, is trying to separate flow management from all of the other attributes. The Moros drains diversion also, of course, needs to be resolved more adequately to enable the trial to be more definitive. In other words, it's sitting there as a problem out to the side.
So we reached out, ECAN, to Arawhina for their comment on Richard Allibone's report, and I understand a report copy has been provided for you to read, but I'll just summarise the key points that were brought up. So Arawhina noted that their values are not just cultural, but they fall under the other categories identified to ensure the mori of the waterway and the species that live within the water. And this wasn't necessarily captured under the original consent conditions of what we were hoping to find out from this trial. So that's something that will be considered moving forward. They stated that the health of boundary drain, while it does support some indigenous species, is low, and that actions to simply maintain the waterway is insufficient. So they would like to see objectives for the drain in the future referring only to enhancement and not maintenance of poor values. An issue was brought up regarding Richard's use of the term abundance. So Arawhina believe that the number of species present do not suggest that species are found in abundance, and that this may be misleading for people reading this report, so we'll acknowledge it here. They were also concerned by the lack of macroinvertebrate species that were shown to be absent due to their sensitivity to environmental degradation, and particularly nitrate. There was concern that there was no recommendation for how this could be improved in the next trial, which will be considered as well. And also reiterating that the hapua mouth is very important, and as the flow affects the ability for the hapua mouth of the drain to open and close, it affects a bunch of those habitat and fish and waterway health items. So we must keep in mind the importance of monitoring the hapua mouth and how the part that it plays within the trial as well.
So finally, the sort of next steps from here with this whole trial and process, as this is now a consent reapplication, which is largely a continuation of the trial for another 5 years, is what is being applied for currently. That does beg the question of going forward, should it be the same monitoring, or from the learnings to date, could there be a somewhat new emphasis? And I suspect as we're moving into this area of talking about habitat and water quality and things like that integrated together, the monitoring may have a somewhat different emphasis. I would be remiss not to have a bullet point to indicate that there could be an adjustment to the flow regime going forward from here. Certainly the economic assessment is showing that it's been very beneficial to the farmers, which is really good, which is where they initiated it from. But in trying to achieve all of the outcomes, it would be remiss not to say that there may be some re-evaluation of that flow regime at some stage going forward. But habitat enhancements are an integral stage, and certainly I think Mark Webb and others had talked to Craig and his colleagues down there about there are steps to improve the habitat of boundary drain, particularly in those lower reaches, whether it be enhancing those willow-treed, those 2 or 3 fairly isolated willow-treed meandering areas that provide pool habitat for many of these species, and certainly enhancing that type sort of environment is one option. But then I'd be remiss not to be sort of taking the learnings that this zone committee has learnt from Mark Webb's other work on, say, Windermere Drain, of putting rock riffle clusters in reaches of Windermere Drain and Deals Drain and places like that, and showing that they were quite sustainable in a farming environment but improved the habitat quite considerably. So I think going forward, habitat enhancements could well be an integral step of improving the environment, so we could be heading more out of the maintain and into the enhancement without necessarily requiring more water.
I'll just acknowledge here too, sorry Adrian, that the new consent, if it is granted, will be running alongside other community initiatives such as those undertaken by the Mid-Canterbury Catchment Collective, and proposals to, like you say, install these rock weirs, and how that will be monitored or measured for impact alongside the flow regime, what we found from Richard's report. So we'll be working to make sure that those are quantifiable, the other what we can see in terms of improvements to the habitat that are made alongside the trial.
Yeah, that's great. Water quality improvements must be acknowledged as a factor as we integrate everything together, but as a committee you're aware of, that's a long game. As Plan Change 2 has indicated, it's a long game trying to improve and reduce those nitrate concentrations, but certainly they need to be on the table. And then there are parallel processes for the nitrate reduction enhancements. Gains will be made in parallel.
So with this is also referring to the Plan Change 2 targets for nitrate reductions by all farms in the Lower Hekio-Hines catchment. So those were only just coming into effect when this trial started in 2017. So again, we've got a new situation moving forward if the new consent goes ahead. How will we capture those parallel processes that should also be making gains and seeing how they're reflected in the boundary drain? So the next point, cultural monitoring. So Arowhenua have indicated that they're very keen to undertake it for the second tranche of this trial, if it goes ahead. It is part of their mandate to undertake that work. Ali Crane updated me that for them it's a work in progress in terms of equipping themselves with the required software, etc., to augment their current cultural monitoring processes to be able to undertake this in the future. So this shouldn't be left out of the trial moving forward, and it will form an integral part of what we are monitoring by establishing a baseline and then being able to assess change on that over the new trial.
Thank you, Maria. That's and really the final bullet point here is once again acknowledging where we've gone from when this trial was first initiated back in 2017-18 through to now. Is overall the health of the waterway is now front and centre in terms of legislation, and so I'd be remiss not to be mentioning Te Mana Rotoai and Ki Uta Ki Tai in this sense of really putting this trial together as a package, and that's where we think it'll be going forward. Thank you.
Happy to take questions if any come up.
Yeah, I see that on the chart there was that low flow of water was in one of the months was in March. Mm-hmm. Do you realise that our tuna starts migrating, especially short fins around the beginning to the middle of March, the short fin males, and that continues right through to the end of April, where the long fins start to migrate. And in the meantime, the lamprey are coming in. Mm. So that low flow in March could be a problem of the short fin if there are any migrating, especially the males.
Yep.
Not getting out to go to Tonga. Another question is the...
Would you like me to answer that one and then we'll work through them, please? So thank you for that comment. Yes, totally agree that so certainly the small male short fin tuna migrate in March. They often migrate on a fresh or a wet period. So we're hoping that fresh protection rule is the one that will allow them to make it to the sea. But I'm certainly well aware that we've had situations like quite recently down by Taumutu where the shortfin males have been stranded just behind the barrier beach when they haven't had access to the sea and had high mortality. So it is certainly something we should consider, and determining whether the fresh protection rule alone is enough or whether it needs a bit more attention.
I think a wee bit harsh by saying they were stranded. That's the way it is with Te Waihora. We only, because the male get there 2 to 3 weeks before the females, we can't open for the male because it could be closed and you can't open it again. So the females get stranded. So we didn't deliberately strand them. That's the way nature is.
Yeah.
No tekiwai in the waters?
No.
Tekiwai, freshwater crayfish.
We didn't find any in there. I was quite surprised at that. Certainly we would have expected to have picked them up, but whether that's a nitrate issue or a habitat issue, or we're not sure. But no, they were certainly missing from the report, is that we didn't capture them in any of the surveys.
It seems so where there's high nitrates in the waters that very few tekiwai, if any, are in those waters. And the other thing, Mataranga Māori must be part of the consent, not just a one-off culture monitoring, but the Mataranga Māori culture monitoring throughout the 5-year consent, if it's allowed. I mean, it's different to say Mataranga Māori cultural monitoring is different than just cultural monitoring. I'm sure Arafana knows that.
Adrian, if I just a point of clarification, could you just explain a bit more about the Morrow's drain diversion?
The Morrow's drain?
Yeah, just does the water then come back out to sea from the drain? What happens to that water that's transferred?
I think you can see on this figure right at the beginning of the presentation, the green line is boundary drain coming down and going to the sea. Morrow's drain is slightly to the north and parallel to it, and it rejoins boundary drain right down at the mouth, right down at the beach. But there's a managed diversion across into Morrow's drain, just above where the purple line starts, to support an irrigation take at that point. Throughout the process, we'd been trying to make sure that only just enough water went through that diversion to supply the irrigation take, but frequently probably half the water of Boundary Drain was going across into Morrow's Drain. That's quite often quite a problem because Morrow's Drain is actually very poor habitat. It's quite silty and it's quite a silty bed with quite poor habitat features, and therefore is very substandard. And particularly in Kimberley's presentation on macroinvertebrates, you'll often find that Morrow's Drain had much poorer macroinvertebrates than, say, Boundary Drain. And so that's why we're sort of raising that as an issue that needs to be addressed. Of Boundary Drain in particular, we were dealing with, because it's actually potentially quite a nice drain with good gravel substrates and sort of some potentially good habitats that can work quite well as a trial here.
And how many irrigation takes are on Morrow's Drain?
I believe it's only one.
I think it's only one right up near the top there.
The farmer involved in that is very active in its enhancements on the waterways at the moment, through the catchment collective and
Down at the bottom,
his own things, and it is his vision that they will do away with that when they can.
Yeah.
Okay,
So I think he's working with that.
thank you.
But we'd be remiss not to have mentioned it through the report, and Richard Allabone did, that
He did,
you could
yeah.
see often in several of the graphs that a lot of the water was going through into Morrow's Drain.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, humblest apologies for late, so hopefully I get the question right. But Adrian, one of the points you make there is there was two seasons where you couldn't do it because the consent wasn't triggered. So that tells me that the flows in the drains were quite high or more than adequate. But we're talking about only maintaining because of the 2 years that we were part of the trial. But there's 3 years where you weren't part of the trial. So I would have thought the habitat would have been very good because it wasn't water quantity was the issue. Is that right? Or are you trying to signal it's about habitat rather than quantity at all? Because given that a bigger part of the trial was actually no minimum flows were triggered, I was just trying to get it round through my head was what the problem was.
And I think that's why we're illustrating that the issue is as much about habitat and water quality and other issues than it is about flow. We're considering that we really need to be more considering them all together than where this process first started, but just looking at flows alone. In those first 3 years, we're saying there was no real change because the flows were pretty much always above 150 litres a second at the Trigpole Road site, so therefore they weren't triggering the new variable flow regime. And it was really wasn't even 2 years. It was actually 1 and a bit years, wasn't it, Kimberley? That we only got that brief period to see what the effect of allowing those lower minimum flows in the peak irrigation season and what effect those might have.
Yeah, it's unfortunate we missed the first year of the trial. ECAN Consents offered us the consent. We agreed to it, and then they didn't give it to us until March. We missed the very dry year in the first. That could have been the first year of the trial. But the farmer group has agreed, and we weren't allowed to do any enhancements to the drain during the trial period in case that clouded the results. But the farmer group has agreed to implement up to 50 weirs in the drain if we get the consent going forward. So hopefully it will address the habitat problems and enhance the drain.
Are there any other questions at the back? Oh, sorry, Sydney's.
Oh, hello. Were there any other chemical parameters that you looked into apart from the nitrate that could maybe explain the poor water quality and the low count of microinvertebrates?
We looked at the amount of algae and macrophytes, which are the aquatic plants. So that could also be having an influence. The aquatic plants showed variability between the years. So in the low flow year, of course, it was a lot higher in aquatic plant growth because they don't have the same flows flushing them out, but at the same time these aquatic plants are also managed by our drainage team at ECAN, so sprayed or mechanically removed out of the drain. Sediment's also an issue. So yeah, there are all other things that are taken into consideration that influence on the habitat.
So, so you looked into oxygen, temperature, the nitrate, but were there other things that could be in the water, like pesticides or anything else, apart, or heavy metals or phosphates or any other chemical parameters, or you just look at nitrate and oxygen?
So we look at dissolved reactive phosphorus. It is the influence that would have is that it supports the algae and macrophyte growth, but it itself doesn't have toxic impacts. And we have not collected pesticide or heavy metal data for probably 10, 15 years in these waterways.
Yeah, thank you all for your presentation. Very, very good. I just had one question in there. There was a comment in there around how essentially when it comes down to it, it's not necessarily going to be the flow rates that make the difference in terms of the health of the rivers and the biodiversity. It's all about water quality. Is that a fair summary to take from that? Obviously, if there's no water in the river, that's going to be an issue. But tinkering at the margins around minimum flow rates won't make a difference really in the long run to the health of the river.
I think probably in a flow sense, probably the closure of the mouth and therefore connection to the sea was probably the biggest flow issue that was coming out to us in this variable flow regime at times, and therefore trying to make sure that those were addressed as appropriately as possible. And that to some extent comes to the questions that Les was asking us earlier. But I think, yes, we are flagging that just looking at water quality alone is quite sort of blunt and probably not particularly effective, and that we've got to be looking at habitat and water quality and things and trying to improve all of those, because there are a number of stresses on these drain systems that all need to be addressed.
I guess where I'm trying to get to is it's not just about making sure there's more water in the drains or in the rivers. It's about the overall picture about what's government, council, landowners doing to improve the overall quality in the habitat.
Yep.
Thank you.
It's probably worthwhile to note that the influence that the water dike system had on the boundary drain to the flows, and that's where this whole process started, really, the loss of flow to the drain, and that was leaving us irrigators high and dry for long periods in the summertime. Probably, I don't know, a rough guess, we're probably at a third of the flow most of the time in that summer period than what we were during the water dike time. We sort of got to about Christmas time in those days, and the flows would increase unbelievably by huge amounts during the summertime for the overland flow from the water dikes. So what we're trying to create is something to what we had through the 60s, 70s, 80s, into the early 90s, when this minimum flow was set. Everyone could live with that at that time, but it's changed.
It's also worth pointing out that boundary drain is one of the largest drains in this whole area, which is why it's really useful. It's probably the most useful drain system to trial with, because it's the one that probably has the most values in it and has one of the highest flows in it. To therefore for the learnings from this to therefore be able to be taken on to other drains, particularly in that Mayfield Hinds sequence to the south down towards the Rangitata.
I would have to agree with that, Adrian. When you've got good quantities of water and you've got a good substrate on the bottom, you're starting from a better place than when you've got a dirty bottom and whatever. Yeah. But mine's going to be a slightly gnarly question, is predation. And with the species that you're talking about, is predation going to be one of the biggest problems, that you could have low numbers for that? Or is it a lens that you've put over it where, let's say, trout or something else have been eating whatever, given the volumes of fish are low?
Certainly a consideration. However, we did find that adult species were rare, so it's generally going to be the adult species that are wanting to eat fish. What Rich did say in his report was that in the absence of the larger macroinvertebrate prey sources, could lend that then those larger fish species are then predating on the fish. So it's definitely a consideration, but given that we didn't see a lot of adults, there's probably going to be less predation from the adult fish and more focusing on the smaller year of the young of those species.
John at the back.
Yeah, just more of a comment really, thanks. Just another thing that the physical thing may need to be considered in relation to the opening or closure of the harbour and equally important in Canterbury is the southerly swell and amount of sediment drifting along the coast. Even the major rivers and coastal lakes like Waihora, Wairua have trouble staying open, so and require artificial openings, so that may be a thing to consider as well.
Thank you.
Thanks, John. But the interesting thing of this, with having a camera monitoring almost continuously the mouth, was how frequently the mouth stayed open on Boundary Drain, and it was really only when it got to these really low points that it was actually starting to close.
If we have either really heavy southerly swells or prolonged period of southerly swells, those sort of global scale processes which are harmful.
Well, unless there's any other questions, I'd like to thank Adrian and Kimberly and Maria for coming along and presenting it, and I hope it works in well with the community and granting the next consent period. And as Adrian said, this is really important for the other drains that this monitoring goes on, and so hopefully it'll all carry on with the good work that you're all doing together. So thank you. What's next on our list?
We've got Kim, who's going to come and talk to us about social media guidelines. Yeah, so Kim from ECAN, one of our great communications people, she's going to give us a bit of a chat about social media, which RD has been asking for a while. So, and we've talked in the past about how we can be a bit more visible.
Yeah.
So, welcome, Kim.
Press 1 so you go red, I think.
I'm Reed. Cool. Kia ora everyone. A few familiar faces, but for those who don't know me, my name is Kim Whitwell. I'm one of the comms advisors at ECAN. I've worked at ECAN for about 3.5 years and worked with the Central Water Zone Committees and also quite extensively with the Northern, so Waimakariri, and also the Kaikoura Water Zone Committees. The question about social media isn't new or unique. Most water zone committees come across it every now and then, and so I'm here to, I guess, have a chat about use of social media. In the agenda there was the presentation about use of social media, and there's some kind of good tips and tricks about good social media posts in there. I won't go through it word for word, but if you do have any questions after this, then welcome to get in touch with me. I suppose the kind of key points are that social media works really well when it's locals talking to locals, so people like to connect with content when they can connect with the people or the places that the content is about. And while ECAN has a relatively good social media following for really local content like water zone committees, the best platforms that people can use are their personal pages if they feel comfortable doing so. Otherwise, they can leverage off local Facebook groups or pages that might have similar content. So if there's a kind of Ashburton or other local environmental groups that might want to get connected to your content, that could be a really good option. That's probably the crux of it. Does anyone have any specific questions that you want to talk about? I didn't kind of pre-plan anything because I thought we could just have a chat more than me speak at you.
Hello, thank you for coming. I actually was wondering about creating a Facebook page for this Water Zone Committee and managing in addition to using the personal profiles.
Challenges that come with establishing your own page for local content is getting a following. And if you've got local pages or local groups that are already established that kind of have that following, it's much easier to leverage off their connections and their groups than it is to establish your own one. social media, I'm not 100% over the techie stuff of social media, but they have special algorithms that if you haven't already got a good following or lots of likes or shares or stuff like that, it's really hard to kind of get the people that you're trying to get when establishing your own page. Yeah, so from our perspective, we would generally discourage establishing a social media page for water zone committees or other things like that, given that you're all very well connected people already, and can probably utilise existing channels really well by sharing and connecting with those channels and the people who run those channels. There's also the issue of resource. To get a good following, it does take quite a lot of resource to man a Facebook page and to keep content flowing. So to get more uptake of your content, you have to post regular and you have to be commenting back straight away, kind of thing, which significantly increases the amount of time and manpower that it uses to make the page successful, essentially.
So with that in mind, and I do agree, having the manager of about 4 or 5 jolly pages, so linking in with some local, for example, Ashburton District Council, because that's part of one of our main groups here, is there opportunity to use that platform, which I understand has got quite a good following, and it's a go-to place for a lot of people on a regular basis. So I wonder how the rest of the committee feels about, and Linda was here earlier, but talking to some of their comms team about could we dot some zone committee updates on their page rather than try and create one of our own, perhaps, and more so probably relevant to Ashburton than perhaps going onto an ECAN page.
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak on behalf of ADC, but that seems like a really good first step, given that the audience is most likely to be majority local than comparative to ECAN. And, ECAN can and does share content relevant to Ashburton, but I suppose from an organisational perspective, there's a certain tone and approach and that sort of thing that we have for our digital strategy, whereas ADC might have something different and be able to focus a little bit more in on that local content.
It's probably in the papers, but I missed it if it was. But so what percentage of ECAN's communication is via Facebook at the moment?
Pass. I mean, majority of our news stories are posted to Facebook, bearing in mind that, again, the tone and approach of Facebook is a little bit more casual. So there might be other pieces of work that are posted on the website that are more for sharing direct links to certain groups or stakeholders, but kind of general, wider community news, most of the time it makes its way into Facebook. Okay. Yeah, and we have, there's the other pages. So It's Time Canterbury is also resourced by ECAN Comms team, and that's a sort of a joint page between TAs and ECAN focused on climate change content. And then there's the Civil Defence Emergency Management Canterbury page, which is also resourced, not entirely, but quite a lot by the ECAN team. So yeah, we have certain pages for certain things, and all of those audiences are quite different.
It'd be fair to say that, from what I've seen, ECAN might do a small story about something the zone committee's doing, and we've probably done that with Bill's chair's column, and then bits of that might go onto Facebook as a smaller story. So we sort of get multiple editions, or out of one story we get it into several different places, which seems to work quite well, and then we can share it again from there.
Yeah, the website page tends to be the sort of source of truth, and then depending on where we're sharing that content to, the kind of base information might change. So Facebook, sort of more casual, very short, with a very short link to the website. Email newsletters, probably like a paragraph with a link to the website page. Newspaper copy could be, if we're talking about a column, it could be the full column, or it could be a shortened version, depending on space and appetite from the newspaper. But yeah, the website is definitely the one source of truth.
You've only got 16,000 followers.
You have.
Can I just make a comment? I think this social media things, it's really sensitive like we are a group of community representatives, council, ECAN, what else is, like so many different entities, and I think that should be a protocol in what to put on and where is it going, because that could, I don't know, upset a lot of people. They are reading to their news. They're going to say, okay, what is this? Is it from the community representatives? Is this from a political, you know, like Ashburton District Council? Is it ECAN, regional? What is it? You know, I think that needs to be some protocol in place so we don't fall into a black hole. I don't know.
Hence my comment, back to Ashburton District Council, they'll have all that protocol in place. They'll have all those checks and balances and how to monitor things. So just to try and move this forward, I would suggest, with my comms background, that the first place that we touch base with is to test the appetite of ADC and see whether there's willingness there. I don't think we can sustain it on our own. I don't like putting that sort of stuff on my own page because I like to keep it uncluttered. But if a good story comes through, or a story like the boundary drain, it goes through the ADC comms channels, gets all the vetting and the filtering, that's the sort of thing I'd quite like to be able to share onto mine, if I think it's something that the wider community would benefit from, you know, knowledge sharing around. So however we move that, I think...
So is that for you to do, Dave, or Kimberly?
Just my thoughts on that is ECAN has a certain amount of budget for every zone committee for comms work. So we, as you'll see, we pull stories together on behalf of the zone committee. Our terms of reference says that Bill is the only one who can speak on behalf of the zone committee. Others can through Bill or whatever, as long as he's in the loop. So maybe the chain is we come up with whatever we want to talk about. ECAN helps put the story together, and then we give the package to ADC, or I don't know. I'm just thinking in terms of helping with the labour side and the costs that ECAN is already funded to do some of that work. You know.
I think there's a good news story around the work that Artie's done around the funding matrix and trying to be more cohesive there. I think that's a story in itself, and I commend you for what you've done there. Great to get that story out there, and then hear from more people in our community. Great idea. How can we be involved?
Yeah, I think we've had articles put in from the Southern Wahara and the crisis. West Mountain has never ever quoted anybody from the zone committee. It says the zone committee. It doesn't say Tamutu says this or against this on it. It's always just the zone committee.
Chris, have you can tell us how many followers you've got on your page?
3. No, I think it actually, what Dave's saying is this resource within regional council, but I also like to bring the other partnership of the zone committee process in, which is the district council, and putting something back into the local stuff rather than being the regional council. It might be the same story, but I think a way of hosting it locally, connecting directly more with our community as well. So I think, yeah, it might go onto the regional council's page, but actually put it on the...
Should be mirrored into the...
Yeah, and on behalf, I think we should tell our what have we got? Neil Brown, the mayor. We should actually just delegate it. Tell him what he's doing.
Well, Richard, yeah, you can pass it on direct.
Okay, well, I think that's a good conversation, and we'll try and coordinate. You got, sorry,
Yeah.
you want to say something?
Yeah, I think my goal was to get more community engagement because a lot of people in Ashburton are not even aware of this group. And the ECAN website and the Facebook page are great, but I'm not sure how many people from Ashburton are within those 16,000. So it would be good to have us also as community representative to share that, and the ADC, if the comms team are happy to do that, that would be a great source, a great way to get to the community. I just wanted to add, I don't know if it was in the presentation, that if we share stuff, Facebook doesn't promote links, outgoing links. It promotes videos and photos and things like that. But if you just put some text and a link, Facebook will definitely won't promote it a lot compared to other stuff.
Yeah, that's relevant for video as well. So if you've got a video and you post it direct to your Facebook page as the video file, it favours that over if you had have loaded it to YouTube and then you share the YouTube video. It likes to, you know, protect its own content. So it will always share your, or give your video on Facebook more airtime than a YouTube video shared on Facebook. And just jumping back to that resource thing and finding stories as well as, you know, comms resource is a finite resource for both ADC and ECAN. But again, I can't speak for ADC, but from ECAN's perspective, if zone committee members, you know, find a story and they want to write about it and create a draft for us to support, then that's okay as well. You know, we're more than willing to work with zone committee members on content that maybe we wouldn't have picked up otherwise. So yeah, I suppose just keep in touch through Dave and we can see where and how we can give it a little bit more coverage.
I do find that ECAN's publicity team are pretty good, like the Ashburton Lakes and everything, they were on that and that got released and everything pretty well. But I think Carol would have captured in the minutes and Richard will have enough when you report back to council about coordinating it probably.
Just adding to it, that we do have our meetings and we rely on media whether they want to pick up and say what's gone on at this particular meeting. And if there was a way of just capturing some of the outcomes of our meeting and that it does go through the ECAN and the, but how does our community know what's going on unless they happen to read an article that happened to make it to the paper? So
We need to put support for that.
Yeah.
Haven't been for a long time.
No. Mm. A good point. So, well, thanks for coming down, Kimberly, and talking to us. And hope that's answered a few of your questions, Artie, and we'll try and work in that space. Cool. Thank you. Next one, Dave, is yours. Is that committee update?
That's, oh yeah, committee update.
Do you want to do that first, or do you want the big camera catch?
Wami's not here yet, is she? No.
the report from the last meeting would have been very brief though.
Well, what chance does that give the media if you're going to keep them so short? We're tidying it up at this meeting.
Yeah, we're doing all the backlog of work now.
It's going to be quite a full meeting.
You should have been here.
Okay, all right, thank you. So the committee updates on page 32. We've got this hui on Friday, 31st of March. This is at Waiho Marae. Now I know it's although there was a sort of save the date sent out that the actual invitation was a little late coming out and not everyone can make it. It's going to be a pretty interesting meeting because it's going to be talking about the new planning and how we're going to be doing the integrated planning and how zone committees might fit into that process. So it's going to be quite interesting. But the good news is that it is going to be on Teams as well. So you will be able to look at it if you can't make it.
So, I unfortunately am not available, but is Ange
Angie's coming, I
and
think.
possibly Artie?
Yeah, I'm still
Right,
not
so-
sure in terms of
So is anyone else who's available would like to go, that'd be great. You'll be there, obviously.
meet by Google Meets. Do I have to still register?
Oh, sorry.
Like, if I want to be online, do I have to register or anything, or just?
You should have received a meeting invite, and
Okay.
there will be a Microsoft Teams invite in that
Okay.
meeting. If you haven't got it, just get back to me. Yeah, same with anyone. Yeah.
Obviously, you'll keep a good eye on it for us, Dave.
Yes. I'll be running around making the cups of tea.
Just on that, Dave, I was meant to go to this one on Friday, but I'm tied up. End up going to Rapaki on Monday.
Oh, you did?
It
Yeah.
really is worthwhile going.
Yeah.
It's a tell from when we started 11 years ago, where we came through the steps and we're from here. And it's best to go with ideas and let them know what we really want to do. And as I said to the central one was, okay, we've had 10, 11 years of telling us what's wrong with the environment, what's wrong with our waters. How about now we get together and say, how do we fix it? And work that in somewhere into the zone committees more than, like we have good presentations,
Yeah.
but it's still telling us we have problem with the water. We know we've got problem with the water. We need now somebody to come and say, like the best thing happened in agriculture in the last 5 years is planting plantain. And do we support that type of thing? And a lot of those type of things, so
Solutions.
it's well worthwhile going.
Thanks,
Oh,
Les.
thank you, Les. Cool. The next item on here is the Rakitaka Rangitata Revival Field Trip. So this is still being formulated, but the idea of the field trip at the moment is that we would meet somewhere like the Ealing Hall, have morning tea, hear a presentation from the group on the revival plan, or the draft revival plan, which is coming out for consultation. Chance to ask questions, get an understanding of that, and then we'll go visit a couple of sites. Perhaps come back for lunch, more questions, and then also, if we need to, we could have a short zone committee meeting if we need to do anything.
It's still 1 May, are you looking at?
Still 1 May, yep.
You don't think that'll change?
No, I think,
Dates?
well, hope not. Trying to lock it in. And then we do, Jen's not here, but we were talking about 23 May having a working bee at Staveley Camp, and probably a short meeting there as well. She wants to get us to work. That could be quite a good little story, actually, that one. Yeah, so that's not really put together yet, so it's an idea. And then the second item 2 is just the follow-up information with some wonderful photographs there of the Otawharakai pop-up event that some of you were able to come to. I think from my point of view it was pretty successful. We didn't have a huge crowd, but the people that were there were really interested. Some good conversations. I think Bill conducted a question and answer session which was really good. We had the scientists and and just a chat between everyone. Artie and Ange and everyone was just really
That's
cool.
good. Lovely day out there.
Yeah, we had Fish and Game, we had Ashburton District Council, Forest and Bird. So yeah, it was cool. Farmers, yep. Firemen, lots of firefighters everywhere. Hut holders, yep. Sausages. Yeah, so.
You're in 3 of the photos there, Bill. You're really holding media.
Well, yeah, sorry, Chris.
Yeah,
Talking to Mike too.
that's right.
So,
Does anyone have any
that's what
questions
I'm paid
about
the
that
big
day?
bucks for, Chris. That's what I'm paid the big money for.
Yeah, that's right.
Star performances.
Can we go back to the Rakitata revival?
Yep.
What is that? Sorry.
Very good question.
Kim might be able to answer this pretty well, better than I could actually.
All these things just keep popping up sort of out of nowhere, and like
This is a,
everything has to be always coordinated, but I'm
Yep.
constantly surprised how much stuff keeps.
I know, yeah. I will. Do you mind, Kim? Because I think you could give a much better,
I can try.
quick overview of the history and the project.
Vaguely,
Yeah, cool.
vaguely answer. So the Rakitata Revival. So the Rakitata Revival Program is a collaborative program that was started by Doc and Arowhenua, identifying a need for a whole of river approach for the Rakitata, and it was born out of conversations between Doc and Arowhenua and Doc's Ngā Awa program, where Doc has chosen rivers throughout the nation to focus restoration efforts on. That was after the 2019 flooding, and essentially conversations have been ongoing for the last however many years, that is 2 or so years. And in that time, Environment Canterbury, Ashburton District Council, Timaru District Council, Central South Island Fish and Game, how many is that? 4, 5, 6? I feel like, Arowhenua, Lynn's, thank you, I knew I was missing someone, have all come on board to partner on the program. There's a whole heap of projects already underway using Jobs for Nature funding, in sort of weed control, predator control, having mind blank. Yeah, lots of projects underway.
There's a few such as like biodiversity, encroachment, flooding control. Yeah, plenty of stuff regarding biodiversity. Really. Yeah, there was a council briefing on it maybe a month ago.
Yeah, 3 weeks, month. Yeah.
Yeah.
So are you making any progress?
We haven't heard anything apart from that council briefing yet. James, I'm not sure, or Les, I haven't heard anything else.
Richard might have.
Is there a list of people that are on there?
Not that we're aware of, but there must be somewhere.
So I'm just interested to know, because I see Ashburton District Council, and I was just wondering who
Yeah.
or what.
Yeah. I can't tell you exact names right now, but I can.
It'd be
find
great if you
names
could,
for
because,
Yeah.
you know, it's,
You think either Henry or David could see who's involved and maybe send an email out to everyone, please? Chris?
Yeah, am I allowed to ask the dumb question, like, where does Reki Tata come from? Is it a, yeah, but it's Reki Tata, and I've only ever heard of Rangitata. Is it just a new pronunciation or a?
Dialectical, so NGK is interchangeable.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Depending on which part of the South Island you come from.
Oh, cool. Thank you.
James, you've got nothing from Arafin to update? No. Okay, well, if we get a list of who's involved, would be a good place to start.
I think it just draws attention to that funding conversation we want to have later.
Yeah.
Like if we're not looking at the bigger picture and who's doing what, who's who in the zoo with giving out money and all the rest of it, it just feels so piecemeal. And so that used to be called Restoration Project. It's the same project that's been going for quite some time. It's just got a new revival. Seems like.
John, you're rather quiet on this. What stocks?
Yep, as I'm in the Christchurch Connect to talk to Geraldine, but Brad Edwards is the main guy who's
So
the
it's-
project leader.
Okay.
I was going to talk to Dave afterwards, who he's been in touch with and Brad Edwards and Tony Priest, the operations manager, keep people on top, Geraldine get in touch with.
Okay.
Cool. The committee might remember that we had a presentation some time ago from the Arawhenua nurseries about their program. This is all for the work they are doing, the Jobs for Nature work. They've got a big nursery at Arawhenua, producing thousands of plants and doing pest control along the river. And Kim, we're coinciding this with the launch of basically the draft plan and the consultation, aren't we? So
Yeah.
we will get a lot of information in this meeting in May.
Yeah. I mean, it's quite a big program, so hard to summarise in 10 to 20 seconds. But yeah, essentially there's a draft revival strategy which has been developed by the partnership, essentially. And we're preparing to go out for community feedback on that sort of April, May, so to coincide with the zone committee field trip. Yeah, I mean, I can speak in depth about the comms and engagement stuff for it, but the wider program detail will be provided on that field trip by subject matter experts.
So this field trip is a chance for the zone to get engaged,
Yeah,
because we haven't been till now.
yeah, most definitely. And there will be a comms and engagement or a more detailed comms and engagement presentation style stuff there with opportunities for engagement. But equally, if there's things that the committee are particularly interested in being engaged in that catchment, by all means let me know before then and we can have a chat.
Well, we would if we knew what they were doing.
Yeah,
We don't know what's going on down there.
okay, noted.
I have had a few reports from a few farmers there and it's not that favourable, so it'll be interesting to see what comes back. Okay.
Just one last thing on that is that, of course, the other side of the river, we have the OTOP zone committee, so we're looking at combining it with them and inviting upper and lower if they want to come along, just out of interest. So that's that. Is Ronnie's really
Any minute now.
Can you, should we go on to something else or can you two carry on before she gets to what do you want to do? Wait.
Do you want to get a cup of tea?
No.
No.
What's next?
So next is really talking about our action plan fund.
Oh, I suppose we don't really want to get into that if we stop, do we?
No.
Would you want a quick cup of tea for a few
If we
minutes?
just look at the funding application that you put together as a separate piece for a start,
Yes, that will be cool.
We'll do that, yeah.
Okay.
and then we don't get too donkey deep into it by just looking at
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So this document here which is called the Application for Funding Zone Committee Action Plan Budget. One of the things we talked about at the last meeting was that we wanted more detail in our applications so we could understand them better. So ECAN have created this application form, and I've completed this one here, which is for treaty education, one-day treaty workshops. This is something that OTOP they're funding some for the South Canterbury Catchment Collective, and it's just an idea that I put forward from, just one of the ideas from me for you to consider. So this, often we have two-day treaty workshops, which are really good. But we recognise that a lot of people can't afford to take 2 days off to go on a workshop. So another option is to run a one-day one, a bit shorter but still really good. The person who has been providing them for ECAN is Sharon Annett. There are other providers as well. The cost is around $2,000 per workshop, including, you know, the catering and venue hire and all that sort of thing. It's a great way to, I guess, get some of our people in our community a bit more on board, a bit more up to date with treaty issues and our history. It's just something for the committee to consider funding. So we haven't got a lot of other funding applications at the moment. There's a few things in the air. Last time we met, we wanted to go a bit more strategic. One of the things Ange asked about was whether we could have the Ashburton AdBag, their new strategy, to come and talk to us about that. They're not quite ready for it yet. There might be another month or two. The process has got to move along a bit further. So that was to give us a bit more big picture stuff.
Feels like we're having conversations parallel to each other.
Yeah.
We need to do this.
Yeah, exactly. I've talked to Christian about it, I emailed him, and he's come back and says, yeah, keen to, but not quite ready yet. So I'm conscious that we've got till really the end of May to have this wrapped up so that we can pay everything by the end of financial year. So it would be good to start making some decisions on what we want to fund. And I know it's not easy, and I've just on that bigger sheet have the things I know about, but you guys as members of the community here probably know a lot more than I do and may have some other ideas or more strategic things you want to do. So that's just one little one on that piece of paper.
But the actual template itself looks good.
Yeah.
Like you can take that away and work with it or give it to a group.
Yeah. And I've been doing a couple down in Lower Waitaki, helping, and it's made life really easy actually. Yeah.
My only question is, what's the feedback loop on it? So the reporting back in, so they get the money, off they skip. Yeah.
So what happens once the zone committee recommends this, it then goes to Cam Smith at ECAN, who controls the funds, and he goes yes or no. If he goes yes, then there's another agreement, a funding agreement, which has reporting and all that sort of thing in it. There's two agreements. One, if it's more than about 17,000, it's a more complicated agreement. If it's less, it's not quite as bad.
So are you saying that we've got a zone funding of 50,000, we agree as a committee where we want to spend it, that you can still say no?
Yes, because the zone committee doesn't have authority to spend the money. It can only recommend the money. It was the same with immediate steps. It could only recommend it. It is actually an ECAN budget the money comes out of, so the ECAN manager approves it. But generally they do approve it.
So it's just approval, really?
Yeah, it has to be. It's
unusual for them to decline, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I haven't seen it, but it'd be more likely they'll come back with questions than say,
We haven't had anything not approved yet.
But part of this, with this thing here, it says where it aligns with their action plan, and that's the main thing they're looking at, and that there's nothing kind of like, well, that looks like a conflict or that, that sort of thing. Yeah. So that's kind of how the process works. There's a few other steps in there, so it takes a little while to work it through. You've got to do purchase orders and get these agreements signed and get the money paid.
So you can get us a blank copy of this that we can...
Yeah, I have sent you one. Yep.
If I have sent out an email.
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't see
Yeah, I only sent it yesterday, to be honest. Just a quick update. So the blank form's there, but just come back to me if you need it anyway. So at a meeting like this, we could be looking at a concept. We may not be able to do this form yet. We might have to go away and do the form, but it just depends you know, where we're at. We might say, hey, we really want to do something about this area of the river. Then we've got to get it down to this level to get the funding. Yeah. Is it all clear as mud?
Yeah. How long do you think you and Phil talk for? Oh,
Not long. We I think we can have that discussion. Phil Everest's in the room from McHenry Catchment Collective, so he's led the project. So the we two from here, as part of the conversation in here, will all help shape next steps with it. Yeah. As I said, it's stage one of a two-stage project. So for my mind, it would be nice to be able to go back. There's, I think, about 5 names on the list that Romy, in her time as a summer student, didn't get a chance to speak with. So first of all, it goes back to the people who've contributed. They get a chance to edit or review or give their feedback. You know, really important that it represents what they were saying, and also have a chance for the ones who she didn't get to talk to. And that was a lack of availability. That was a lot of reasons over the Christmas period and timing. So once all of that's done, then I'd say we've got a final copy that we'd be in a position to share. And that's just my take on it, would be the process from here. Yeah.
and just a quick, if this is embargoed, it's going live stream now. Do you want us to discuss it or not?
Oh yeah, I think we can. Yeah. It's just getting the raw information out there without context is often a dangerous thing. But now that we're starting to have some of these discussions, this is appropriate. Yeah.
Fresh. Yeah. So Romy and Phil are going to give us a bit of science. So far away.
I'll just reintroduce myself. I'm Romy Vanderboom. I've been the summer student working with the Mid-Canterbury Catchment Collective. Summer just gone.
You might just have to lift that microphone just a wee bit. Or move a bit closer.
I'll just roll it. Can you hear me? So yeah, I'm the summer student that's been working with the Mid-Canterbury Catchment Collective, and then it'll turn into a master's project as well. So I believe you've all just got copies of my report. So yeah, I spent 10 weeks over the summer doing a bit of a water science update. I met some of you during the process. So I'll just run through the executive summary. So the purpose was to basically go out and find out if there was any data that was missing from the ECAN database for water quality and quantity in the Ashburton district. So we define that as the Rakaia to the Rangitata, including the rivers themselves. So when I started, I got given a whole list of people to go and talk to by the Mid-Canterbury Catchment Collective, and set up some meetings, went out, talked to people, found out kind of all the projects that are going on, as well as what data was available. And yeah, there was mention of some shoeboxes and that sort of thing, and upon collecting the shoeboxes or pieces of paper, I found that most of it had already been found it was already in the ECAN database on Canterbury Maps, and so I had to go through and match all of the well IDs and site IDs for that, and it was all in there, which is awesome. So basically it just means that everything that had been discussed about being paper copies is already in an electronic database. So yeah, there's a whole list of people in here that I talked to, and in the end I ended up discovering a data set that ECAN has been working on for the last 2.5 years, and it's basically just lab samples that they've gone and found from ESR and the South Canterbury Catchment Board and the Department of Scientific and Industrial Research Chemistry Division. I've got the whole spreadsheet. It's like 633 samples, and they're from all over the place. So no one has done any analysis on any of this data ever, because they've only just found it, and ECAN's basically been like, well, what do we do now? And that's where part 2 of my project will come in. So yeah, I won't go through the background because you all already know. I'm not sure if you want me to talk about the people. Okay. So yeah, I went through the Heinz Drains Bible and went through every piece of data that was mentioned there and made sure that it was all in the ECAN database after I got access to the ECAN database. And everything that is mentioned in there from Fish and Game and from, the Heinz Drains Committee was all electronically available. And then I went to the Canterbury Archives and spent about a week in there looking through the archives, and some of that's embargoed and I haven't been able to look at yet. But from the North Canterbury Catchment Board, there was some data points in there that ECAN does not have that I thought was pretty interesting, but there was nothing for this region, which is what I was focusing on. So they've said that in here, that I think that would be an interesting avenue to look into further. It's not going to be a super dense data set, but it might be some of the earliest data points that we will find. And then there's just a little summary about what the existing data is, and that's all from Environment Canterbury, and I have all of those data sets now, and you can also find them on Canterbury Maps, but they're just not in a very accessible format. Yeah, and then so the kind of gold mine was what I found from Philip Agenson Earl at Environment Canterbury, and yeah, there's 633 samples that the earliest dates to the 1940s, and it's not it hasn't tested a lot of water quality variables. It was kind of like pH, and I think one of them was conductivity, and it wasn't super informative. But then in the 50s, which ECAN doesn't have in their accessible database, we're starting to get a bit more interesting information. So we're getting phosphorus and we're getting conductivity, which we can then get nitrates from, along with a few other variables that are not coming to mind. So yeah, that is pretty cool, and no one's ever done any analysis, so that's made me really excited about doing some analysis on it. And that is what I did over summer.
Well, I suppose this is excellent that all this can be put together in one place. I suppose the first question is where to from here?
Yes, well, I have a section called Where to From Here.
She does.
So,
Maybe just, if you flick to the appendices in the back, the last 3 pages, just before Remy starts on there.
You're not expecting us to read that, are you, Phil?
Page 9, Bill. So it actually, it's really just to show you what's available and how it's available, all right? So that would be, we've just put in some examples of the raw data as it sits.
Yeah.
But it needs some interpretation, and so it's where to from here, which is the next part of Romy's project. But yeah, I know it's small. The object is not to be able to, the object is not to be able to read it, but to actually show you what's there, sorry. And that's
there's a
what
lot more than what is in these screenshots.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that.
We thought that was better than nothing.
No, I understand what you're saying. How the raw data looks is like this, and then you'll close.
So we now need to get it in a format, Bill, that is usable for the community.
So just, if you look at the Hinds Working Group, the boundary drain trial we just heard about, and they talked about their nitrates and those things. Hopefully in this data here, you'll have some baseline information that might, so that'll be good.
Yes, yeah, that is, I haven't had a chance to analyse any of it. This project's been mainly about gathering the data, but that is hopefully what I will be doing with my master's thesis, is getting a baseline. And then, did you?
I think, Bill, to be fair, you know, that the historical data we've got to date is pretty good tonight. Well, it's good in the 2000s, it's not bad in the 90s. It gets sketchy in the 80s, and there's very little beyond that. And so the data points that Romy was talking about before are actually new data points that we currently don't have in the database at all. And so to me, that's the exciting part in terms of showing what's happened over time, in terms of what's happening within our catchment. Because we're very short-term focused in what we've got to date.
Chris.
So if, for the community to look at it, just at a really high level in your judgment, is it geographically where you think there's some good trends that you've got the gaps filled in, or is it just really good data at certain locations over periods of time that you've got lots of parameters you can look at? Because we can't treat the Canterbury Plains as one, but do you think we've got quite a good spread geographically where there's a lot of tests?
I haven't actually plotted any of it, so I don't, like, all the information I've got like longitude and latitude of things, and so I'll have to go and map it to actually see.
There's a big part of it actually trying to put it on a GIS as well.
Yeah, so that, so I will be doing that as part of my master's project and getting a bit of a, like, seeing where this testing is actually being done. But the 633 that I mentioned in here, that is specifically for the catchment, where if you look at the figure in here, so there's more data points than what I have got for the whole Canterbury Plains, but the 633 is just for what you see in page 2 for what we're calling the mid-Canterbury catchment. So yeah, I can't tell you anything about where the sites are yet. I haven't had a chance to do any analysis.
Okay, no, cool, thank you.
Sydney?
This is awesome. That's really good. Thank you. But do you already have your main question? Is that what is in here in part 2? you are doing the relationship between the water quality changes and land use changes in the region, or an analysis of how the water quality was done in the past and it's done now. So, or you don't know yet what your main question is?
We're still figuring that out. My supervisor and I and the Mid-Canterbury Catchment Collective, but because I don't start my thesis until July, so we haven't kind of nailed it down. But yeah, it is going to be looking at the difference between the new data set that we have, which is the older data, and then the current data, and seeing what the difference in the trends are, and hopefully doing some fluxes and that sort of thing.
Can I just suggest that with that, along with doing that, you'll need to look into how was acceptable to do the water quality before and what is acceptable now. So there are many techniques that were improved. And of course, if you compare their water quality data set with what's now, it's not going to work because that changed a lot. So can I just suggest that you look into that as well?
Yeah.
To make sure that that's going to work.
Yeah.
So you're talking about testing protocols?
Yeah.
Doing it best practice?
Yes,
at the time.
that's right. Yeah, because what it was done in the past, it was different from what's done now.
Yeah, I think that's kind of one of the main things that we found is that basically until we knew that, nitrates and phosphorus weren't great to have at high levels, no one was actually testing for it. So yeah, we'll be definitely looking into that and hopefully using conductivity to get a bit of an idea of what nitrates were doing prior to actually testing for nitrates.
James, you got a question?
I just had a question on the embargoed data. Did they give you a reason why you couldn't access that?
I have not heard anything about anything.
Yeah. Because some of it looks like it's 80 years old, and I couldn't see any reason for it not to be given to you.
Yeah, so when I went online, it said it had to be embargoed for 100 years.
Okay.
For privacy, and then you jump on and you look at the North Canterbury stuff, and it's got people's names and addresses and their allocated takes. So I'm not really sure, and it's been radio silence.
James, just to follow on from that, so Romy did her work over the Christmas holidays, and obviously that wasn't functioning at that stage. We've subsequently been in contact with them, and we're hopeful that that information will become available. We were not totally clear of the process, and the process is that whilst you can go to Archives Direct, you actually have to be given permission from ECAN to go to the archives, and so we've got that sorted. Should that not happen, then we will take the stick approach and find out what the information is anyway.
Can I just ask a question? Obviously, this whole water debate, cultural sensitivity is important, and you acknowledge that in your introduction. How do you measure cultural, what their expectations are, or what is a suitable level that is culturally acceptable? Or, because we're talking theory against science, I'm not sure if you've worked that out, or is it too...
There is a way that you can calculate the cultural health index of a water body, and I don't know it off the top of my head, but it is something that you...
There is a formula.
There is a formula, and it's kind of a bit of linking of social science and physical science, but I don't actually know.
In the where to from here, you mentioned both analysis and further data collection. So are you going to do both?
Yes, well, hopefully. So, hopefully we'll get our hands on that embargo data, which is, I guess, one of the benefits of me not starting my thesis until July is that we've got a bit of time to do that. And then I've also potentially got some more data coming from Macmillan Drilling, who have taken water quality samples at every site that they have drilled a bore and maintained bores. So I'm hoping that we'll get that data, but I didn't include it in here because I hadn't actually talked to the people and I didn't know if they wanted to be included. But
okay, thank you. And is there a plan to make this data set available to future researchers, even a sanitized version if there are privacy issues?
Yeah, that is the goal, is that at the end of this, everyone can have access to the same data that I've used.
Not going to embargo it for 100 years.
Maybe 75.
Sydney, yeah.
Can I just cannot see here, did you have a look at all the other master theses done before you, and is that somewhere around here? Somewhere?
Yeah, so that is a process that I started and I did not finish in the time, but because I have to do a lit review alongside my thesis, it'll kind of become part of it, and then I'll supply the lit review alongside my final thesis to you guys.
Okay, so this is all the extra stuff.
Yeah, this is
apart from all the thesis that was done in
Yeah.
Lincoln and Canterbury.
And
Okay.
a lot of that, it's quite difficult to actually get their raw data, which is what the purpose of the summer project was to get raw data. So there's been a lot of analysis done on the mid-Canterbury catchment, but it's quite difficult to actually get that data.
And you've got a question?
Sorry if I jumped
No,
down.
you're right. Then there's just that.
Just further to what Romy's talked about. So in terms of a networking and a joining people opportunity, Romy would talk to someone and they would enhance the conversation and then say, your best next step is to talk to someone else. So they within the system know. So we've basically tracked down all the work that likes of Dr. Helen Rutt has done and so forth. So the lit review is Romy doesn't need to start the process from ground zero. Because there's a whole lot of knowledge within the community that says, Romy, your best place to start in terms of value for money would be here. And they've been super supportive of that. Everybody sees huge merit in the work that she's doing and have been really welcoming. There's been time constraints as people have been under-resourced and put under pressure. So we'd like to, as MCCC, use the time between now and when Romy fires back up to follow up with some of these people and just keep gathering and lights of Sydney, there'll be other questions that we need to be asking. So we're not saying that this is full and complete, but we're saying it's a jolly good start within a 10-week time frame.
Great.
Yeah.
Can I just suggest as well that you're doing surface water and groundwater?
Yeah, there were. I was looking for surface water and groundwater.
Because I see here in your table of collaborators that newer, it's not listed, but is it something, because I know that they have a lot of projects going on.
Yeah. All of their analysis that they've done is, or not, yeah, no, he's MPI. Yeah. Yeah, basically they have everything online, that all the testing that they've done. So I can access that, and then that is linked into Canterbury Maps. So I've already.
So Emmy's down the bottom there is now with MPI, but wasn't never.
Yeah, so he's. And he's.
They have a few projects going on that they are looking into the rangitada and also some isotopic data for rain in this region. So that would be really great information to have for your thesis. So I think even though like this person is you, I suggest that you also get contact with someone in you in Christchurch. They're really willing to support researchers.
This project was focusing on kind of prior to what's being done currently. So yeah, when I talked to MS, he said that basically all the climate station information is already publicly accessible for the time frame that I was looking for, which was kind of pre-2000/90s.
Les, did you have a question?
Well, not actually a question, just a bit of information, not criticism either. In the archive you got down there at the Selwyn River. It's not, the Selwyn River's been renamed through museum maps, whatever. It's Waikirikiri.
Okay.
Selwyn. So I'm not being critical. You probably didn't know.
No, I didn't. Okay.
So I let everybody know it's the Waikirikiri Selwyn River. In fact, they talk in the whole Sarong district. It's Waikirikiri Selwyn.
Okay. Good
Chris?
Just ask the first bit, the question. Ministry of Works, they did the original RDR, is that right? Did they have any scientific data, or was that just too hard filled to get there?
Yeah, broke your heart, to be honest. They, a box of matches was actually the way they recorded it.
Oh, really?
Terrible.
Oh, okay, righto. And the other one is, given that there's, once you work out that there's some gaps in data, the zone committee can probably be quite helpful to annual plan or long-term plan to try and fill those. Do you think your timing will help us for the long-term plan for ECAN? Because if there's something that's really important, I think it's hard for trying to get ECAN to do water testing, but when you can come in with something behind it and say, here's a real gap, it's going to be help the whole community. I think going with the recommendation from the zone committee would be helpful. We can't tell them what to do, but we can recommend it.
Hey, we'd be wrapped, short answer. And I think, Chris, to answer that in a little more detail, like we're hoping, well, we're not hoping, this will be GIS mapped. It is already with ECAN. And so we'll be able to pull some of that information anyway. It's just putting in this old data set. And it's like, let's be clear, we've actually got very little data pre-1990. And what data we've got, we need to, and it looks like now we can maybe grab it back to 1940. And we need to get that urgently on the publicly available site.
Well, Henry's over there, so you take all this on board?
Yeah. Lots of notes.
Good man.
When are you expecting to finish your thesis?
End of June 2024.
That's great. Well, I think that's a very good conversation. Is there any other questions anyone would like to finish off with? So, Romney, great to have someone of your calibre to do this for us, and well done to Ange and Phil for making it happen.
They've been so helpful. I should say thank you again.
So it's great, well, sort of what catchment groups and background and coordinate.
We landed on our feet, we're super lucky, but the Waterways Centre, there's been a lot of collaboration to get to where we're at, so it's full credit to everybody leaning in and making it what it is and then what it could be.
Yeah, excellent.
And I think, Bill, from our point of view, from the Catchment Collective and the community, thank you very much for the funds that the Zone Committee has put to make this actually happen. And we just hope that stage 2 will bring about the data set that we're all actually looking for, that we can actually put our hands on and use and touch and feel, and it will be available for everybody else, as the questions you've asked. So thank you very much to the Zone Committee for your support as well, and much appreciated. Thank you, team.
Great. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, Dave.
Should we link back to the...
We'll link back to the funding.
Yeah. Those are my bits of paper. Just a question for you, Ange. In terms of the funding that went to the Catchment Collective for this research, is that all used up now, or is there still money for further work?
It was all used up. So the time Lincoln or the Waterways Centre invoiced us for her 10 weeks, and that's how it panned out.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, before we even said how much money had been allocated, it came in at around about that figure. That's what they average for a summer student to cover some of their costs and travel and everything else. So serendipity was it just balanced out really nicely. Yeah, and so we've obviously got the paperwork that we're more than happy to supply for that too, if there's interest in that.
Yeah, I was more thinking from terms of keeping this going for next year. Does the Catchment Collective still have funding to do the phase 2 of the project, or will you be coming back looking for more money?
I'd really like to see the MPI Essential Freshwater funds that we've got available be prioritised into something like this, and it fits within the criteria. It obviously fits within the science, the budget allocation that we've got. I don't see at this stage that there'll be any shortfall, but then basically we scope this up as novices on the ground now that we've got the attention and the eyes of, in particular, Dr. Izzy Barrett, who's very involved with the Waterways Centre. They're going to help us scope up where to from here. And what exactly that ends up looking like, we don't yet know. So now that we've done this, anybody that wants to have some input or see some value opportunities going forward, that's, I guess, the benefit of having the coordination on the ground here. So my time, as well as Romy's time, will be used to make sure that this is as robust as it can be.
Cool. Right.
I got to chase ECAN. That's my job.
We'll move on to action funding. This has been in front of the committee for a while and it's been circulated, so we should have a good, robust discussion and have it tidied up in 20 minutes.
That would be fabulous.
Right. So you lead it, Dave.
Okay. So we have, I guess, two applications in front of us. One is on that new format, which was just the idea of running the treaty workshops. The other thing was the Hekau Hines Water Enhancement Trust request for $10,000 for maintenance of plants at NNR1 site. Last meeting we decided to defer that because we wanted to look at what all the other things were we were going to fund. The other thing that may come up in the future, but we don't have details yet, is that there possibly will be a request for funding for Carter's Creek for water testing. That's to do some fecal source tracing. Water testing has shown some human waste in part of the creek, and it's just trying to determine where that might be coming from. But we haven't got the figures for that yet. There's also Wakanui. We haven't got any specific funding requests there at the moment, but one thing we have talked about is, well, probably I've talked about it, is whether it might be an option to invest some money in some sort of a study or a consultant or someone to actually look at the question of water there and pull together all the information and come up with some final recommendations for that. Because we seem to be kind of going around it all the time but never quite getting there, and that's just an idea. So those are the only things that are kind of on the table. A lot of these other ideas are floating around, but I'm not sure what other things you as a committee are keen on funding with our action plan fund. Adi.
Something that I've been thinking of, especially in regards to the Waita action plan that was still available this year and opened 2 years ago, to see more mid-Canterbury projects applying for that successfully. We have at the moment 2 projects from mid-Canterbury that have successfully registered, and so potentially put some of the money towards consultant service or advisory service, someone that could help these groups that may struggle to write funding applications to different options. That was part of the reason I created the new matrix of funders. So if they struggle, there would be some professional person that they could go to that will help them.
Do you think this format that they're talking now about how you can apply, do you think that makes it easier for people to have applications?
Yeah, the format is for us, but I'm saying to allow them to apply to other funders.
Okay.
So that what we actually got last year with the funding multiplier of the funding. So if we, let's say, for example, put $10,000 for a consultant service, and they could help people apply for $50,000, then we will multiply the money by 5. So that was something that I would like to see.
I suppose there's different options. You could have someone who has that skills that people could come to, or you could run some workshops to upskill certain key people within groups. Yeah, I don't know. Just see what people think.
It's basically about getting it out there to let people know if they were trying for a 50 grand fund that we can help them put that application in. But so how do we get that message out to these groups? Where are these groups that are doing this sort of work?
Well, to begin with, we could contact all the people that have applied to us and let them know about others. For example, in this application about the Tiriti Fund workshop, they've marked they haven't tried any other group, any other funders. So just the knowledge would help them, but also some groups I think would shy from doing the application for some of the funders could be a lot more complicated. So someone who has experience doing those things, as you said, could help them put those things together. I was wondering, potentially that's something Ange could answer. Possibly the Kanuka Trust could be provide such a service for that fee or other groups as well.
Yeah, it's a bit of the chicken and the egg. I think until we as a region figure out. So Hines School, for example, have got quite a big restoration project that they're wanting to do at their school, in and around the protection first of the Muhlenbeckia, the plant that's on the fence. So it's currently sitting with Ashburton District Council. Will we be successful, won't we? Is that project, and if not, would that have been better targeted to this fund, to our 50K? So as people apply, some coordination of those applicants between the funds that are available would be helpful. If there's resourcing, if there's funding that could get allocated to resource that within Kānuka Trust, they have a new community connector on board. I think she's definitely got the skills and the wherewithal to do it, and I love the host a workshop idea. But she's only going to be able to do it by working with everybody working together. So is it the Kānuka Trust's job to pull everyone together for a start, or can we do that here? And then the next piece of work is have that person working within a fully functioning, collaborative. We've got $140,000 to spend. We've got all these projects on the ground. How do we do the match? Is that what we're interested in talking about doing?
I was actually thinking of a much larger pool because it doesn't have to be just the 140,000. If you look at the different funders that I put, there is so much more, and people could apply to the ADC, to the Mackenzie Charitable Foundation, other stuff. But if at the moment either they don't know about those funders or they are shying away from putting those funding application, that's something that I'm also envisioning that we could help them with.
I wonder, Adi, what your thoughts are around the Ashburton Funders group. There is a group of people that meet, which is Funders Forum, which is broader than just environmental stuff. How this fits in, because I know they do occasionally have sort of a day where they'll present on all the different groups, and how that would fit with this.
I've been in deep past roles, I have been in touch with them, so they do sometimes open days just presenting the different funders, but they haven't never provided this service of helping people apply for a fund. And that idea for in different spaces than ours has been floating around for a while now.
Well, started for 10. You've got these ideas, Dave, that you've got down here, and one's applied, plus this one. Do you think you should circulate this template, a clean one, to all these organisations here, just saying we're doing a funding round. This is how you apply for it to start, and then the funding metrics, which gives another option. And then what Artie's talking about is a bigger picture again, which is this. Was it called Funders Forum?
Yeah.
Is that what it was called?
Ashburton.
And yes, there is the Mid-Canterbury Funders.
So maybe we drop them an email and just say we'd like to keep in touch, make contact with them, and start a process of communication and to see what falls out of there too. But so we can be proactive on this. So we give these people a bit of a push and say, we're into our funding round. Here's a template. Apply for the funds.
Okay.
Unless anyone's got a contrary view.
Just another comment, just going back to the boundary drain trial, and that drain habitat and enhancement, and Craig talking about the opportunity. They weren't allowed to do anything while it was in the trial phase, but the opportunity now and the willingness from the community to put in 50 weirs to start enhancing that. So are we going to be proactive, if you like, and follow up saying where there's that willingness, there's funds available to match?
We'll send them a form. I mean, if they're prepared to put the effort into applying for it, we'll certainly look at it, but we're not going to do the application for them.
No, not for them. But
there are definitely things we should be looking at, I'd imagine, as a group. That'll be it.
It's got district context.
Exactly.
Like they said, get this one right, then we'll do other ones.
it's replicable, yeah.
So it'd be Craig Fleming probably.
Correct.
Wouldn't it? I'd imagine send it to him.
And the Lowlands Catchment Group, absolutely.
Okay.
In the absence that Jen was here, maybe a couple of meetings ago, she mentioned something about actually having a predator trap library. Is that what they call it? Yeah. And I just thought something like that is. Predators are a big problem if we're looking at biodiversity and looking after the river berms and banks and whatever. If we could wait for Jen or someone like that, someone who has got a bit of the know-how around what you would do, but I think something like that, what we need is something scalable that you can, just get that flame going within the community. And if it was scalable that you could do this up and down river berms, I'm sure we'd make a big difference on biodiversity protection.
Well, that leads to a big question, because ADC, I'd imagine, would be into that space as well, and if we could joint fund with them, then we get a really good bang for your buck.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So I don't know who you sent that one to, Well, the ADC bio, do you know much about that, Richard? Yeah. You're on it, so...
Sometimes you want to be careful you don't get too tangled up in the project itself, because I notice here there's a couple here on the Pudding Hill stream rather than the concept of the project. Like I think the weir one's a very good idea, but aren't we better to put our efforts into the weir design so that can be plonked anywhere rather than actually the doing of 7 weirs in one river? Because, that concept, the concept of it's the great idea, isn't it? Then people can take that, we own the intellectual property rights, you can take that and plonk that anywhere. Isn't that more important than actually the doing of it? Because the doing doing needs people on the ground to do it, but the concept can be done and overlaid anywhere. Is that?
I think making the improvements in the boundary drain and seeing the improvements coming gives you confidence for the community to invest more, and that what they do is going to make a difference.
I think the concept, if I'm correct, Mark Webb from Fish and Game, the concept's been done. It's all through that trial and through the Heinz drains working. So conceptually, but if you look at what it costs per weir, costing that up and the actual doing of it, they don't come cheap. So if we look at who pays, who benefits, and some of those do some of those, that critical thinking, everybody benefits if we've got a better, healthier ecosystem in the stream. So to me, it's something that the wider community should be funding and supporting.
Partially. Not totally.
Partially. Yeah.
Okay.
You give me a few things to do.
That's right.
I'll come back to you if I need any more information on who to contact, etc.
Okay. So just rounding off, so you're going to send those forms out. We're going to get in touch with the bigger funding group and see what their appetite for engaging with us is.
Yep.
You're keeping in touch with ADC.
Yep.
It's pretty good, I think, at the moment. Val.
Come and turn your microphone on, Val, because people online might better hear.
Just, we know who you are, Val, but just introduce yourself for the...
Okay, my name's Val Clemens, so I'm in Forest and Bird and at BAG and part of the Wakanui crew and various other things. And I've been very interested to hear what you've been talking about today and a lot of the aspects. And I just wonder if, because we have a few new members on this committee, if I could just do a plug for Wakanui, please. As I know I keep coming back and harping on about this, but can I have...
You can have a minute.
I can have a minute. Okay, so what initiated my coming here today was talking to Christian, who said that he was going to encourage you to do a feasibility study for getting water back into the Wakanui Lagoon more often. And I realise you can't get a constant flow there, but more often is what we would hope for. And for the people who haven't been here when I've been speaking before, I just wanted to go through some of the layers of significance of Wakanui. And first of all, we can start with the archaeology. So in 1971 and 72, Michael Trotter excavated an area at Wakanui which was thought to be 14th century Maori area where there were moa bones found, moa eggshells, tools, adds heads, and there are these two beautiful linked basins of baked clay sitting, and they're now buried under a paddock with cows wandering over it. So there's a whole archaeological history which is really fascinating. And then we can come to the Mahinga Kai from the exhibition that was recently in the Ashburton Museum, put there by Ngāi Tahu Cultural Mapping Project. And the quote I've picked up from that is, Wakanui was an important resting place for travellers during their journey along Aratawhito, the traditional travel route of the Canterbury coastline. Filled water bottles were left purposely on the banks for travellers as there was no fresh water between Wakanui and the Rakaia. Foods gathered at Wakanui included kiori, or rats, birds, aruhei, bracken fern root, and waharoa, or smelt. And also there would have been tuna in the lagoon as well. So ADC are already involved and achieving a great deal, and another 800 plants were put in last weekend. They've also got a commissioned landscape concept and management plan and has been working to it. And some of the things that have been discovered in the time that they've been working down there is that there are more than 25 species of native plants in the area, and this is on a reserve, a district council reserve. An entomological survey was done, found a total of 52 insect species, and all but 5 are native species. And just from going through what I've seen, and I'm not there most of the time, I've seen more than 15 species of birds come in, particularly when there's water in the lagoon. Then you've got the community involvement. So Wakanui School began planting in May 2018, and if you're down there, have a look, because it's starting to look really, really good with the flaxes are growing really well. The children gathered the seed and sowed the plants, and they were grown in the ADC nursery. And we had another seed gathering day the other day, and they gathered 4.5 litres of flax seed. So if you can imagine a flax seed, well, that's a lot of seeds. And they inserted bollards under the supervision, this was in 2018, under the supervision of archaeologist Michael Trotter and his assistant. So there's a lot going on at Wakanui already. As well, as part of a series of projects along the Aratawhito, there are 6 projects that I could think of. So we've got the Rakaia Mouth, we've got Wakanui Beach, Ansco 5-Star have just started planting in a huge planting project that they've got going. There's the Hakateri Ashburton Mouth project. Graham Harris has a covenant down near the Rangitata. And there's the Rangitata Mouth project, that you've already mentioned today, as well as all the Hines Drains projects. I would just really like to see you guys come across to the north side of the Ashburton district and do something there as well. I know you've learned a lot from the Hines Drains. I'd really like to see some of it applied.
I think we did give some money, didn't we, with the clearing the trees?
Yeah.
So we have supported your project, and we continue to support it.
Okay.
Is there another project that you have applied funding for? Is there another one coming, or what is this one on the paper?
It's Wakanui on the paper, that's the same thing.
We've talked about it in various ways, and I'm just sort of nudging you along, I think. The recreation is another of your is another thing mentioned in your plans, and it's a very popular spot for Ashburton residents. There's always cars at Wakanui whenever I go down there, and people just go walking for the fresh air. They go picking up rocks, they go fishing. There are a few permanent residents there, and there are batches that are used down there. And it also used to be a popular whitebaiting spot. You've got a status report on the bed of Wakanui Creek as to ownership, which goes to this middle of the creek idea of the landowners. And I realise that the suggestion of reinstating Wakanui Creek would not be popular, but there is this alternative using the waterway system, and there are two areas in the waterway system which David Howden has ridden his bike up and down a few times and mapped it all out. And there are two areas of probably 2 kilometres that don't have water race on them. The other 12, there is water race available. And some of that water that goes in there actually goes out to the Ashburton River. I think that the Wakanui project could fill some of your objectives, the Mahinga Kai targets, your ecosystem health and biodiversity targets, and the recreation and amenity targets. So it fills a lot of the objectives that you have for your plan. So thank you very much for listening to me.
Thanks, Val. And it is in our action plan, Wakanui, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, we're aware of those, and we'll certainly help where we can.
Well, I just realised though that there are some new people.
Okay. Thanks for the update. Okay, is there any other business?
I've got one, retirement pension board need an alternative to Jen on the committee. We have a 8-member committee, 8 different people, organisations, and the quorum is 6, so if we have Jen away and others, we can't actually have it.
Okay.
So I'm actually there at the moment as the alternate, alternate for Sawa and Tamutu, so they said, well, 3 of them away, you can't survive, so we need an alternate from here.
Okay. So have we got anyone who wants to put their hand up for that?
Is it, only meet twice a year, is it, James? Twice a year, and all mainly what it is only to distribute money from trust power to environment on the retire, not in the retire tax. Have to do with the retire work.
Okay. Right. And? Yeah.
Do they have Zoom meetings? So
Yes, we do.
yeah, I'd be quite happy to go as an alternate if nobody else does, if it's Zoomable.
Yeah, it is suitable. It's only 2 weeks.
Okay, well, if everyone's happy. Oh, good. So we've got 2.
Yeah, well, David will let them know that we can have the 2 of them and
Okay.
probably could have 2 alternatives.
Yeah. Well, I'll nominate Artie and Ange to be alternates on the Rakaya. What's it called, River?
Rakaya River Enhancement Trust?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it actually a trustee role or a committee role?
It's a trust, committee role,
Yeah.
not the trust.
Oh, yeah.
The trust is on the top now.
Okay, so I'll move that. We're seconder. Sydney. Oh, Les. All in favour? Aye. Thank you. Just before we close the meeting, did you want to say something, James, or do you want David to have a resignation? Can you just read out?
Before we jump into that, I just had a thought that I know Artie is now probably going to be an ad bag person. Do we need to formally move that Artie becomes? If you're happy to, Artie, I'll put it back to the chair then.
Okay. So, Ange, you were doing it, is that correct? And who's
Yeah,
in?
I'm a bit like Les. I was wearing too many hats, and if Artie, who in the space that he's moving in, wants to step into that on behalf of Zone, I'd really welcome that.
You happy to do that, Artie? Yep. All right. So I'll move Artie be our ag bag representative on the committee. Do a seconder. Chris, thank you. In favour? Aye. Carried. Thank you. Thanks for reminding us, Dave. Now, next bit of business is James.
Yes. So sadly, James has resigned as our Arawhenua rep because he's a little bit too busy. He's upwardly mobile. I don't know. Do you want to say a few words, James?
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Look, for me, it's a bit of a workload issue, and also, like Ange, wearing a lot of hats at the moment. So, notified Fiona that I'll be stepping down from the Water Zone Committee, and also the another committee that I'm sitting on for Arawhenua. But have really enjoyed my time. Really enjoyed getting to know people and learning a lot about water in and around the district. I think you underestimate how important it is to the district and how vital it is. So, I'm glad to have contributed somewhat, and I'll be working with Fiona over the next, I guess our next meeting's in May, so before then to find a replacement. But just wanted to thank everyone for your time and your allowing me to contribute to the community.
Well, thanks for your interest and well done. And yeah,
Removing your political nominations so you stay on.
too late for that.
You still
So, and we will take you up on finding a good replacement, James, for Arafina, which is very important to this committee, that it's well represented. Okay, that's it. Dave, have you got a clothing karakia, please?
Karakia. Unihia ki te uru tapanui o tāne. Kia watia, kia mama, te nako, te tinana, te wairua, I te ara takata. Kōrara e rongo, whakaari ai, aki ki wunga, kia tina, haumi e, hui e, tai ki e.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.